So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Rose Arsenault. I have actually not met her until this morning, but I have heard her name countless times around campus. She's very well known in the community in Victoria, great supporter of small business, and I also feel individuals. I know you're always here to support our students, and we really appreciate it. She's been in recruitment for over 13 years, I guess, and started a placement group here in Victoria in 1997 and has been successfully involved in that ever since, and is also on the board of the Victoria Chamber of Commerce. So she's very well connected in the community, has a lot of experience in hiring and supporting people to find the right fit for them. So great opportunity. I really encourage you to take advantage of being in front of Rose and asking whatever questions you have about resumes, cover letters, hiring process. I know you're in for a treat. I unfortunately have to sneak out and do a few other things to get ready for the afternoon. But I will hand things over to Rose, and I know you're in great hands, and you'll enjoy the next hour together. So please welcome Rose.
I'd like to make today pretty casual, so I didn't do a formal presentation because I wouldn't have followed it anyway. So I'm going to talk about cover letters, resumes, and interviews, but feel free to ask any question at any time, either just blurt it out or put up your hand. I prefer answering questions that are relevant to what I'm talking about at the time than waiting to the very end and maybe not having enough time to answer any questions. So where I'd like to start off is the cover letters and resumes, because everybody here probably has one and has submitted cover letters and resumes at some point in their time. I can't stress enough about cover letters and resumes that you need to ensure that grammar and spelling are correct. And I say that because I see resumes, I see 200 resumes every week. And I would say probably about 90% of them have some sort of spelling mistake or grammar mistake on them. One of the most recent ones was a cover letter that said I was recently laid. They forgot the off part, but so yeah, I actually ended up calling her just because I really thought it was important that someone point that out, that she was recently laid. So the cover letters are important to really highlight the skills and experience that you have that are relevant to the job. So picking out words from their job description and inserting them into your cover letter and explaining it as clearly as possible of how your skills and experience match what they're looking for. That's where you really sell yourself. The resume, and how many people here just have one resume? Yeah, not good.
No, yeah,
I mean, it's really got to be tailored to each job that you apply for. How many here have, as right under their name and contact information, an objective? Thing of the past. An objective means absolutely nothing. What should be right under your name and contact information is a summary of who you are and what you bring to a workplace. And that should be altered slightly for each job that you're applying for, and relating it to what they're looking for. There are two types of resumes, as everybody knows, functional and chronological. I can tell you that private industry really likes chronological resumes because it's very clear of who you're working for, how long you've been, and what your duties are. Functional resumes have a tendency to either hide gaps in your workplace or not make it clear to an employer of what your recent experience is. And that's what they're looking for. Not many of you will have recent experience from 15 years ago, but as you get older, you know, what you did 15 years ago is not relevant in today's workplace. So chronological resumes where you name your employer, how long you've been there, and what your duties are really lays it out for an individual who's not used to hiring. A lot of the people who do the hiring for their companies, and I'm talking mainly small business, they are either the owners or managers of a certain area, and their specialty is not hiring and interviewing people. So you have to make it very clear for them as to how your experience relates to what they're looking for. And one of the best ways to do that is by listing at least one achievement for every job that you've worked at, and highlighting it, particularly if it relates to the job that they're looking to fill. And using quantifiable numbers or percentages by, saving the company X amount of dollars, or increasing sales by a certain percentage, giving them hard numbers that they can look at and go, well, if they did it for that company, they're likely going to do it for my company. Listing your education, absolutely, very important. Education is never a waste. Volunteer experience, just as important as paid experience, believe it or not. Companies here, and a lot in Victoria, really want to see that you give back to the community. And it should be fairly recent, but I mean, any volunteer experience is really important. It shows that you want to give back to the community, but depending on where you're volunteering, it can highlight certain skills that you bring to the table as well. When you're going for an interview, keep in mind, again, particularly if it's a small business, and it's one individual that's interviewing you, they're likely as nervous as you are, because they're not used to doing it. And they're the ones that need to come across like they know what they're talking about. So there's also nothing wrong with you going into an interview and saying, you know what, I'm a little bit nervous. It kind of breaks the ice. And the first 5 to 10 seconds of meeting an individual, and I know a lot of you have heard this before, but believe me, this is really key. The first 5 to 10 seconds of interviewing somebody or meeting somebody is the most important time. So making sure that you're dressed appropriately, making sure that you have a firm handshake. There's nothing worse than one of these handshakes that kind of like a limp noodle. If you have a tendency to be nervous, kind of wiping your hand before you shake somebody's hand is important. Don't wear sunglasses on the top of your head. Don't be chewing gum. And don't be walking in with a cup of coffee. Because more often than not, that happens with me. And people, it shows disrespect. So saying that you're nervous is absolutely fine. Kind of gauging the conversation and bringing in a little bit of humor is fine. Behavioral type interview questions are the going rage right now. So be prepared. And the behavioral type interview questions are related about, tell me about a time when. That is directly related to the job that the employer is trying to fill. So, I mean, you can go on the internet and research those kinds of questions and pick out certain ones that you think might be related and have the answers in the back of your head. They're always going to ask things about what are your strengths. Be prepared with listing 2 or 3 strengths. They're going to ask you what your weaknesses are as well, and list 1 or 2 and how you're trying to improve those weaknesses. The behavioral type, I mean, if I was asked behavioral type interview questions, I probably never would have been hired. But they're really relevant, and most of the interviews will do them now. It doesn't always come down to hardcore skills. A lot of the small business in Victoria are looking for a personality fit within their office or environment of some sort. So, you know, you can't change your personality, and a lot of times when you're phoning and asking for feedback, and I'm sure you all phone and ask for feedback as to why you weren't successful, a lot of them will say it was just the fit, and they're not lying. You know, they're not going to get someone who's a really quiet individual if their office is full of really loud and boisterous people. It's just not a good fit with him for anybody. Feel free to jump in and ask questions at any time. What else can I tell you? Yes?
Do you feel the same way about bringing water or water containers into?
Yes and no. I usually ask people if they want water, and most interviewers will ask that, and if not, it means that they're really nervous and they forgot. But if you have a bottle of water, if you're a woman and you have it in your purse, if you're a guy just carrying a bottle of water, don't set it on the table, just kind of put it down beside you, and saying, because your mouth does get dry. So it's fine. It's the cup of coffee that you kind of plop down. I normally ask where mine is when someone arrives.
I haven't gone for like an interview and stuff in a long time, but some people, the definition for business casual changed, because I've seen people in like nice dark denim now, and I wouldn't even accept a resume from somebody if they came in to drop off a resume to me when I was hiring.
Yeah.
I just want to know the...
Business casual does not mean jeans of any sort. And when you're, you know, if you're out there just trying to get a job and you're actually pounding the pavement and dropping off resumes, don't wear jeans, because you don't know who you're going to meet at the front. In small business, a lot of time, the manager or owner is standing at the front. So, you know, khakis or dress pants, women dress pants, skirt, look like you're going for an interview. And I don't care where you're applying, unless, you know, you're walking onto a construction site. But, I mean, if you're walking into an office or a restaurant or a retail, dress appropriately.
That was going to be one of my questions, actually, coming from the environmental field. You kind of get in that catch-22 that you don't want to be labeled as not able to hack it in the field, but you also don't want to be a mountain person coming in for a job opportunity. So is there typically just the setting is how you would gauge what you would wear? Is that... Yeah,
I mean, normally if you're going for an interview or dropping off a resume in the environmental field, you're going to go into an office. I would dress a little bit more business casual in the khakis and a nice top. I mean, you've really, if you're meeting somebody out in the field, then dress appropriately.
I just had a question about the follow-up for feedback. Are you saying that that's a good thing to do?
Absolutely.
Okay. And how would you can you sort of give us some pointers on how to do that?
It depends.
Okay.
It so much depends on everything.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you may get a letter or an email saying, you know, sorry, you haven't made it any further. Responding by email, I would try and phone first and talk to the individual who actually interviewed you and just ask the question. You know, thank you for getting back to me, because there's so many companies that don't, believe it or not. And just say, you know, is there any area where I fell short? Is there any area where I can improve? Was it my interview or was it the actual skills? Most people want to help you. If you can't get through by phone, then try it by email, because sometimes people feel more comfortable giving feedback by email. You've been waiting for a while.
Yeah, just going back, you'd said take out the objective and kind of talk about a summary view. Would you want to see objective after that?
No.
And so then after that, would you want to see work experience or education first?
That depends on whether you have relevant experience or relevant education or both.
Okay.
So a lot of people have the education. At your stage of life, have the education, but maybe not direct experience, in which case then I would put your education first.
Okay.
If you actually have relevant experience and no relevant education, then definitely put the experience next. Tuck your education onto the second page.
Okay.
And if you have both, whatever is the strongest. Because as much as education is extremely important, employers want that hands-on experience and or the education.
So like even volunteering before your actual work experience, if it's more relevant?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, so I have a question regarding confidence and humility. So when you walk into a room, like you need to balance that, I feel. And could you comment on that?
You certainly don't want to walk in like you own the place, but you don't want to just be looking at the ground. So, I mean, walking in, the firm handshake, looking at people in the eye and smiling, because a lot of us forget to smile when we're nervous, and that's important. So, I mean, if you have direct experience and your achievements are something that are directly related to what they're looking for, be confident of that, particularly if they're great achievements. I mean, don't go on and on and on about it. You need to make your answers as short and sweet as possible. And clarifying with interviewers saying, did I answer your question? To make sure. They may ask you to expand, or they may say no, that's fine. I mean, if you're talking a lot, which you're gonna in an interview, but if you're talking a lot and you start to see a glazed look on your interviewer's face, or that they're starting to look around, or that they glance at their watch, you know that you're talking too much. So try and cut it short. I mean, talking about your achievements or stories that are directly related. You may not have had an outstanding achievement, but you've been in the same sort of environment or workplace, and telling a little short story that can paint a picture for an employer. I mean, you want to make it as easy for an employer to select you for the job as possible. So pointing out and being obvious about the relevant experience, or painting a picture, or, I mean, anything that they'll go, yeah, I want to hire this person. Making yourself stand out. And again, you're going to need to know your audience. I like humor. So if someone has humor in their cover letter or slipped into their resume somewhere, 99% of the time I'm going to call them. Because if they have humor on paper, it means they have a good sense of humor, and a good sense of humor is important to me. Yes?
And then again, like, how do you balance that perception of being desperate and being very certain that you're very qualified and therefore you don't really need the job? And how do you, like, it's just like dating, how do you sort of balance that? Right?
That is the resume.
You know, it's a very good point that you bring out about the desperation, because that can come across, and when you come across as desperate, people don't want to hire desperate people. They don't, because they don't know then if it's a truly good match, or if someone's just here because they need a job, and then once they get a job, they're going to continue to look.
But on the flip side of that, if you appear if you don't appear desperate and like you don't need a job, is there a danger in appearing too aloof and not interested?
Yes. I mean, you know when you become interested in a position.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a certain spark, there's a certain enthusiasm, there's a certain light in your eyes that comes across if you're interviewing for a job that you really want. And an employer can sense that. I mean, there's, body language is huge. And if you're leaning forward and you're really engaged and you're answering the questions, and you know, maybe you stumble a lot. There's nothing wrong with stumbling or saying, you know what, can we come back to that? There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm really excited about this position and here's why. I mean, be honest with who you are and why you want this position. It's not going to come across as desperate if you truly are interested in the job. And it's not just a job. And if it is just a job and you're just there because you need a job, people are it's gonna come across. And then maybe you not getting the job is probably a good thing. Yes?
So in your cover letter, you want relevant skills that relate to the job and maybe some achievements that you've done that can kind of
I would
relate,
say, save the achievements for your resume.
Okay.
Because I'm going to tell you how I review resumes, and because I review so many resumes, I've gotten it down to a fine art. So if I'm looking to fill a permanent position for one of our clients, the first thing I do is I go to the experience. If the experience and then the education, or the combination of the two, catch my eye, I then go to the cover letter and read it. If there is no match, I don't even bother with the cover letter. So this comes down to applying for jobs that are actually relevant to your education and or experience. Because there's so many times when people, I think, are trying to fill a quota and just ship off a resume that is just, there's no match there whatsoever. If it's because you're really wanting to get into that kind of industry, then my suggestion would be is to try and get an informational interview. And believe it or not, they do work. So an informational interview, say it's you have no experience in the environmental field, you're considering going to school for it, or you've just started school, and you really want to work in that field. Phoning up a couple of the environmental companies and saying, you know, this is what I'm doing. Does anybody there, you know, can you suggest someone who might speak to me for 5 or 10 minutes or 15 minutes? You'd be surprised at how often those people will want to help. They like talking about themselves and how they got into the field. And if you impress them with knowledge, because you're going to do research before you go for an informational interview, and you stay in touch because you've then networked, which is directly related to the other talk that's going on, you've made a contact within that field. And as you progress in that field and you're continuing your education, you're then going to be able to expand that network in that industry. So every contact you make, regardless, is very important, particularly if you're in a specific field. BCom students, much more flexibility because you've got so many different areas that you can pursue. But you know, if it's environmental or if it's engineering or whatever the specialty is. The other thing is keep into consideration that if you're very specific in your studies, you may have to move away from Victoria. Communications is one of the areas where unless you can maybe think outside the box like you're doing, where you're trying to see how communications and sales can go hand in hand, but if you want to specialize in communications, there's not a whole lot of communications positions in Victoria. So, and if there are positions that come up, you're up against people who not only have the education, but the hands-on experience. So you may have to go away to a Vancouver or a Calgary or a Toronto, where you can get hired by a larger company to gain the experience, to get a couple of years under your belt so that you can then come back, and when those communication positions come available, you can then apply and have a much better chance of getting hired. I don't know, how many of you are familiar with employment agencies? Staffing agencies, recruitment agencies, temp agencies. All right, they are an excellent avenue to help you find work. There is absolutely no cost to you whatsoever. There's no guarantee that an agency will be able to help you, but they are certainly an extra set of ears and eyes for people who are looking for work. So the placement group is one of those agencies. There's about 4 or 5 in town. We all have a different client base. We work with the provincial government for temporary staff, but I also have 100 to 150 active clients who phone us a minimum of once a year to either hire someone on a permanent basis or to have someone fill in while they're busy or someone's on vacation or someone's sick or they have a special project. Those agencies try and match individuals with the employers. So Royal Roads is one of my clients. And there's probably about 20 or 25 people that work here on a permanent basis now that started here as a temp. I used to work with Custom House, now Western Union. Ralmax, which there are hidden gems within Victoria. So how many of you are familiar with Ralmax? Did you know that Ralmax owns Ellis Recycle, Point Hope Shipyards, United Engineering, Island Plate and Steel, and Hargym? And they have all types of positions. They have the skilled trades, they have management, they have HR, they have accounting, they have administration, they have everything. So there are agencies who have connections to those kinds of companies that you guys weren't even aware of and wouldn't even know to approach. And there's absolutely no cost. So a great avenue for you to consider. Go ahead.
Do agencies usually work on the local level? Like say for example, coming from environmental, we're basically going where the job is. So looking even Canada-wide or even internationally, would there be placement opportunities for that as well, like agencies that can help you do that?
Yes. The agencies in Victoria, like the placement group is coast to coast. Our Victoria branch only deals with local companies. But if you phoned me up and said, look, I'm willing to go anywhere, I can give you direction on how to get in touch with our other branches. You're gonna find that a lot of companies will only look at you if you're local. And so if there are a lot of opportunities, say in Calgary, my suggestion would be move to Calgary, bite the bullet, and start pounding the pavement. Looking from Victoria is, and it depends on how hard those jobs are to fill, they might very well look at you because Calgary is such a booming market right now, they may not have enough people. But I know that people moving to Victoria, not so much. You know, we have such a highly skilled and highly experienced population to draw from, we don't have to look to other city centers to fill the jobs. So going back to agencies, when you send off your resume to an agency, it doesn't, and I can only speak for our agency, we will respond to every single person who takes the time to submit a resume to us. It might be by a phone call. We may have a phone conversation. We may bring you in for a face-to-face interview depending on that phone conversation. Or we may just send you an email acknowledging that we got your resume and that we're going to keep your resume on file until we have something more relevant. Believe it or not, we actually do contact people 3 months, 6 months, a year down the road that have submitted their resume. Keeping in touch with an agency is important. Following up with an agency is not a bad thing. If you've submitted your resume and you haven't heard anything in 3 or 4 days, we always respond within 3 or 4 days, but follow up. give them a phone call. That's what they're there for. They're there to talk to people. And if they won't take your phone call or won't respond, then you kind of wonder about an agency. But you know, following up with them, staying in touch with them, sending different versions of your resume, watching their website, phoning them up, establishing a relationship with a recruiter, you know, where you can phone them up and say, look, I see this job on your website. Is there a particular reason why, because there's a direct match, is there a particular reason why you didn't call me? Chances are they'll be able to give you the inside scoop, because an agency will also research the company. There's a lot of companies that we have either fired or not worked with, because after our research, we've decided that we couldn't work with them ethically. So where we will screen candidates for an employer and, you know, do the preliminary interviews and maybe do some assessments, do background checks, do references, and we assess the candidates for the employer, we will also assess the employer for the candidates. If we find out that a job, they're trying to fill the same job for the 6th time in 6 months, we ask the question, why is that? And if they can't give us a legitimate reason, it means there's red flags that go up, and we likely won't work with them and direct them to another agency. Yes?
Just a question about writing resumes. I'm not particularly good at it.
Right.
I'm just wondering about having resumes written for you. Is there any, like, I know people do it, but I don't know what.
Yes, there are a couple of companies in town that do it on a professional basis. Resume Hut is one. They, and I don't know what the costs involved are. I believe Resume Hut, because they're excellent, and they pull information out of you that you didn't even know that you had in you. I think they can be over $100. There are some smaller companies in town that are around the $50 mark. But, you know, with the internet at your fingertips and doing some looking at resumes, borrowing words, borrowing, you know, descriptives, borrowing some ideas is not a bad thing.
You probably know this already. I just wanted to pass on some information because I've been doing this for like about 8 months, looking for work and doing my resume. But the career service guy, the counselor, he recommended York University career site. Have you been on that?
No.
It is excellent. It's like one of the best.
Which one?
York University.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they've got an excellent what do you call it, outline of different resumes. And what I find really easy too, if you're stuck with trying to conjure up action words, is they've got a whole list of action words to use that you can infuse into your resume, and it really brings up your resume. It elevates it.
The other thing about writing resumes is get some friends to help you. And if nothing else, get some friends or family to review your resume. Because a lot of times you'll be working on your resume so much that you miss really obvious things. You either miss as in spelling and grammar, or you miss something that, well, yeah, of course I used to do that. Because when you're involved in a job, it's hard to think of everything that you do. But someone who's like a close buddy or a family member, because you've been talking about a position that you've been doing, they may be able to point out something that you just completely forgot about.
I was also told to go through, especially because we're all students or have been students, is to go through the course outline and all your courses that you went through or that you took, and break down the courses and the skill sets that match up to each course, and that builds up your skill set and yours. Yep. And then you can beat it up with work experience. At least that was the advice that was given to me.
Rule of thumb, at about this level that you're at, a 2-page resume is probably the best. Have your references on a completely separate page. Don't submit resumes with your resume. Bring it when you go for an interview. Unless you're prepared to have those people call your references, without even interviewing you, because sometimes that can happen. So, yes?
I'm sorry, at this level, but that's like bachelor students, grad students. What would an executive job search look like? I mean, what if we're looking for higher ranking jobs?
Well, I mean,
would
if
we
you-
then have like a 4-page resume, or?
If you're, if you've got 20 or 25 years of experience under your belt, then going to a 3-page resume, possibly. If you're, depending on the position, project managers will sometimes list all the projects that they've been working on, which is, completely different. So it depends. Rule of thumb is about 2 pages.
And that applies across the board.
Yeah.
Okay.
People don't want to read books.
Fair enough.
So subsequent to that, if we're not at the point where you're just a recent grad, moving on, second career.
Yep.
I'm doing a complete career change.
Yep.
I have 15 years of work experience.
Yep.
I'm applying for jobs that are entry level, middle management, 2 to 4 years worth of work experience. Do you pair out 12 years worth of work experience and say I'm just a recent grad and?
No. You do pare it down though.
Because I end up in the situation where I look overqualified for a job because I'm saying, well, you're looking for 2 years of somebody that has, project management or resource coordination, and I've done that
Right.
for a number of years.
Yep. So then take out the other stuff that
Right.
you've done that's not relevant. So that it shows that you have experience, because that's important. And now you have the education behind it as well. Something else I was going to say about resumes. Right. Good memory is just short. Yes?
I haven't done an interview in a long time, but somebody told me that I should bring a notepad and take notes during the interview, and I've never heard of that. I was just wondering if that's a thing.
You can. I have to admit, in 15 years, very few people do. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. But there was one lady that I interviewed who didn't take notes, but was doodling. And I got really distracted because she was making little stick men, and it was, so I mean, jotting down and say, is it okay if I take a couple of notes? I mean, it's if they start talking about the job that you're going to actually be taking notes, right?
Or bringing notes in with you of things that you've prepared, like you want to have your skill sets in front of you or something that you've prepared ahead of time to catch you on questions that they might ask.
You should know what your skills are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, depending on the position, like, if you're a graphic designer, then of course you're going to bring in a whole portfolio. But taking a pad with a pen and asking if you can take notes if it's relevant is absolutely fine. Just don't draw stick men and things, because I literally stopped talking and was watching her. Yeah.
What about letters of recommendation that people use looking for you?
You know what I find very interesting, because you want to try and keep the resume down to a minimum, and if you start adding in letters of recommendation, but taking quotes out of those letters of recommendation and just adding it, 2 or 3 down at the bottom of your resume, very helpful, and I really like reading those kinds of things. So, but be prepared, putting the person's name and the company down, particularly if it's a well-known name and company, really helps. Talking about references, when you do bring references and the people say, can we call your references? And you say, absolutely. Please call your references and let them know that they're going to be contacted and by who they're going to be contacted. You'd be surprised at how many times I phone a reference and they go, who? Or they gave my name. So, you know, warn your references. It's just a courteous thing to do.
On the topic of references, I think that my bosses right now would make great references for me, but I don't really want them to know that I'm looking for another job. Not because I don't love my job or because but just because I think that they would think that my mind and loyalty is elsewhere, which is not really true.
So you're currently waitressing, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to be looking for something in communications and sales, right? I would think that your employer would understand that you've just spent a whole lot of money going to school, and that you're not going to be a waitress for the rest of your life. That they would be understanding, because they're not. Now, having said that, you really have to be careful, because it could backfire. So, you know, I mean, you're the only one that can really tell whether it's going to backfire on you or not. Some managers are very supportive and say, no, I completely understand, you know, of course you're going to go into the field that you went to school for. I know you're not going to stay here forever.
My other question, I have two other questions. I hope I'm not taking up other people's time. But I feel like I'm a generalist, and I also have lots of gaps in my resume because I was a stay-at-home mother and I lived out of the country. How do I like kind of account for that?
You know what? There's being upfront and honest. I mean, I would rather see a resume that showed stay-at-home mom between this period and this period, travel between this period and this period. Account for your gaps. That's what I would like. Lay it out for an individual. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, being a stay-at-home mom is awesome. Going traveling, you learn all kinds of things. So there's good things about each of the things that you've done.
And my last question is about skills. Like, I do feel like I'm a journalist, and I feel that my skills, although good, I don't have a lot of experience. Like, I'm not 100% on every, like, would I list only the things that I feel 100% on? Like, let's say I have experience using Final Cut Pro. I don't have, like, a ton of experience. Would I list that? Like, or how do I list that I have some experience in something, but not, like, I don't want to embellish.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. You know, if you think that you can sit down in front of a computer program and bang out something basic, list it. If you would have to sit down in front of a computer program and really think about it and, you know, have to search around, I wouldn't list it. So, I mean, it's your confidence level that you have to have, because if you put it down on your resume, chances are the employer, and it's that specific program, let's say, is something that an employer is looking for, they're going to expect that you know it. It's listed on your resume. If you want to say this particular program, basic knowledge, you know, this one, advanced knowledge, you know, it's the same as if it's accounting related and you have a great knowledge of doing accounts payable and receivable, but you only have the education part of the payroll, you can list that on your resume, you know. But if you aced your payroll in school and got, you know, in the 90s or something, then list that as well. I mean, you have to be able to lay it out for them. Yes?
If I were interviewing for a company where I would be producing a report, and so communication skills were important, would it be appropriate to bring a report that I've written in the past, probably from school, that I know like has been marked and I know it's of high value, quality? Would it be appropriate to bring it and present it to them and say, I can produce a report of this quality
Yes.
Even if it was written as a team, because most of our stuff is,
Team-based, right?
that's right. So even though it's not exclusively my writing, it's, you know, certainly my ideas are integrated into it, and I have, you know.
Sure, explain it. Explain it that these are team-based, but, you know, this part was mine, and this is, you know, this was my idea, but somebody else wrote it, this is what I wrote, so that they can see, I mean, giving people something to look at, very relevant. If you have transcripts, like if you have no experience in the position that you're applying for, just the schooling, but you've done very well in schooling, and you have some transcripts showing how you did, very relevant. Attach it. That will help people. Yes.
Yeah, and in terms of cover letter, could you please give us some tips of writing like outstanding cover letter?
Yeah. Do as I say, never as I do. You know, cover letters, again, have to be relevant to the job that the company is trying to fill. So again, it comes down to research. Taking words from their either job description or their website and inserting them into your cover letter is important, if it's the truth. And how your experience and or education directly relates. Like a cover letter ties together the job description that they've posted and your resume and puts it all together for them. A cover letter should be a couple of paragraphs. It should be very clear and concise. The other thing that I meant to mention about resumes, don't write in paragraph form, other than the summary, which is going to be 2 or 3 sentences. Point form is the way to go. Achievements can be 1 or 2 sentences, but your job duties should always be in point form. My eyes glaze over if I see paragraphs of text on a resume.
Going along with that, most of my experience is bartending.
Mm-hmm.
So would you write a short paragraph after you kind of list basic things that you did, like ordering, inventory, stuff like that?
Well, see, that's, you know, depending on what kind of position you're applying for. I mean, the customer service, the ordering, the cash handling, the, you know, inventory, all that kind of stuff. I mean, if you have a certain achievement for a particular company that you did while you, like if you became an employee of the month or year or, you know, list that as an achievement and then write a sentence or 2.
Okay. Yeah. Pretty much covered it.
Yeah. Anything else? Now's your time to pick my brain. It's 10 minutes left.
What positions do you see the most of? Like accounting, like as far as skill set, accounting positions, or probably not communications positions, but you know, nurse. Well, I guess I know you don't do medical, but
No.
what do you see the most? What type of positions do you see?
Accounting, finance, administration, of course. There are, environmental is an up-and-coming, health and safety is an up-and-coming, project management. In certain areas, construction project management is very important in. The healthcare field is, you know, is in high demand. But the one area that I have struggled in the past 15 years, believe it or not, is accounting finance. So there's not enough people going into that field. And
When you say accounting finance, like I have an idea about accounting, like CAs, CJs, bookkeepers, but what about finance, like people that take degrees in economics?
Yeah, there's some people, I mean, the CMA, which is more of management accounting, is more on the finance, which is a lot of the reporting kind of stuff. And then there's the banking end of things as well, which is finance. Going into banking.
Okay. What kind of skill, like what kind of qualifications do those people have to have?
You know, a lot of the banks are looking for people with degrees. And I don't know, I know that BCom is highly desirable because they touch on accounting, finance. But there's, you know, to move up the ranks within the banking world and become manager and branch manager and so on, they always look to people who have degrees.
Yeah. If you're applying for a job that you don't have any skill set for, and you have, you know, education that's based towards it, and maybe your education stands out specifically for that, you know, type of job, is it the best way just to highlight that you achieved a certain grade or something like that towards it, and state, I notice I don't have any experience, but I'm really excited or ambitious to learn.
Yeah.
And you find that like employers to be excited to
Yeah, and it, you know, it really depends on the company. The larger companies have a tendency to be able to hire people who don't have the direct experience but have the education. Smaller companies run so lean and so mean that they really need someone who doesn't need a whole lot of hand-holding. So if you're going to apply in something where you just have the education, that's where you may have to move away, because there's not a whole lot of large companies in Victoria. I mean, let's face it, there's, you know, 80 to 85% of the companies here have 50 or less employees. Those are small companies. And they don't have a chance to handhold and really train someone. So, you know, moving away to find a larger company who will take you on and train you and get those 2 years under your belt so you can move back to the best city in Canada then. Yeah. The other thing is, again, if you are able to volunteer in an area where you have the education but no experience, that is important. So people look at that as well. And I don't know what you're taking, so I don't know if volunteering in certain areas is very difficult, but.
No, I don't think so. I'm taking BCom actually, and I'm looking to pursue an accounting designation. But I don't have any accounting experience except for running a business that I've done myself. I've done budgeting and planning, but I haven't done like any auditing or bookkeeping or anything like that. But I seem to see that those are like the entry-level positions.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to.
Yeah, I mean, I invite all of you to look at our website, send me your resume, mention today, because otherwise I may not give it as much due diligence as, but you know, send me your resume, mention today, and if you want to meet one-on-one, I'm more than happy to do that. It may not be right away, but I'm more than happy to help you out and give you tips and give you suggestions, just because I know that some of you are coming close to the end of your, Royal Roads is all year round, right? You guys are
about halfway.
About halfway. August is?
August is the
right.
I'm dead.
Okay. Meet me. So yeah, it's the placement group, it's pgstaff.com. I'll tell you whether I can help you or not. It's one thing that I am is honest. Any other questions? For 4 minutes early. No? Yes?
Back to the resumes, you mentioned that the objective statement is kind of out and it's better to go over a summary of who you are and what you can bring to that company.
Yeah.
Should you kind of split those up into 2 separate things with headings, or just like your name, your contact information, and then a paragraph?
Yeah. your paragraph is gonna be 2, 3, 4 sentence maximum. Just, you know, this is who I am and this is what I bring.
So don't put a heading for that?
Well, you can put summary,
Okay.
yeah, or profile,
Okay, professional profile.
Yeah.
Mine says point form too.
and that's fine
Is
as
that
well.
okay as well?
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, so many people have an objective as looking for full-time work. Yes, that's why you would be applying to this position. So it doesn't say anything about what they bring to the table. All right? That's it. Thank you very much.